What a wonderful organization Unity is. How I grew up in a church and a belief system where we had all these rules and regulations. Everything was about follow the rules and what would happen to you if you didn't follow the rules, And we were trained on the 10 Commandments. We memorized those 10 Commandments. It wasn't very inspiring. And I was so glad when I came into Unity and they taught me how to break the 10 Commandments. Whoa, what does that mean? How to break the code. Because the 10 Commandments, if you just take them literally, first of all, there's probably a lot more other things they could have come up with that within the 10 they did. But, they only go so far. And they're not very inspiring. But if you break into the inner meaning of what each one means, wow, your whole life will change. And so today we're going to look at the first 2 commandments and how to break them, how to break into the code to a deeper meaning. Hopefully we'll find a little more inspiration in them. Part of me just wants to tear them out of the religion and start with something else. If you want a little extra reading on the side, if you're like me, you probably don't need any more reading, but Emmett Fox has a great book called The 10 Commandments, and Eric Butterworth has a book called Metamorality, Breaking the 10 Commandments. So let's start with tradition. Tradition says that Moses brought the 10 Commandments. And in the New Testament, it reminds us that the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Now that simply means that back when Moses brought the law, he was herding a huge group of people that needed a little order. They needed some organization. They needed some rules and codes to get through this long journey they were on in the middle of the wilderness. But by the time Jesus came along, the laws had become so cumbersome they were a burden. I mean, if you read the Old Testament, the laws, there were 700 to 800 laws that just got to be outrageous. And he came and said, my burden is light. The law had become a burden. He said, take my yoke. My burden is light. There was only one law that Jesus brought, and you know what that was? The law of love. Let's keep this simple. If it comes from love, it's going to be okay. Now, if you take this all literally, these 10 Commandments can become very complicated. Let's start with, they came to him on Mount Sinai. Now, tourists and seekers love to go to the Holy Land where these things actually happen. And the hard part about Mount Sinai is nobody quite knows where it is, and there's a lot of disagreement as to where it is. Matter of fact, if you love conspiracy theories, I love a good conspiracy theory, don't you? There's a book called The Alexandria Link. It's fiction. It's like a Da Vinci Code kind of fiction, but that shows that this land was really an Arab land. But the government there apparently won't allow any excavations, because I don't know what would be worse, having another war over another piece of land or having a bunch of tourists come and invade. So they're just not allowing for any excavation there. But anyway, that's so much for conspiracy theories. They're always a fun little sideline if we don't get hooked into them. It's fascinating, isn't it, that wars are always fought over sacred land. I mean, that whole thing doesn't make sense to me, because it doesn't matter where Mount Sinai is out there. It's metaphysically, where is it in me? What state of mind is it in me where I can go up to the mountain, to that high state of mind, and receive those inner revelations from the divine for what I need today? A mountain is a high state of mind, and a valley is a low state of mind. And if you're like me, I can go up and down, first in valleys and then in the mountains. Martin Luther King said, I've been to the mountain. He wasn't talking about the Rockies. He was talking about that high state of mind when he was freed of the burden and saw the way to freedom. Free from fear before he made his transition. Now, through prayer and meditation, we can rise up into the mountain anytime, like we did today during the service. It just takes a few moments to rise up, remind yourself that God is present. Hook up and connect with that, and then you go forth in that higher state of mind. And we receive revelations then. Revelations on what to do, and inspiration and strength. The Israelites have a whole Torah, a whole collection of written work, where people heard inspiration, but then it's always filtered through the consciousness of the time. That's what you have to know when you're receiving inspiration. It's that it has to filter through your own consciousness, and that's where we can get into a little trouble sometimes. So the Israelites have this whole group of works called the Torah. Muhammad wrote the Quran. Buddha had his own teachings from that high state of mind. Native Americans like Black Elk Speaks. Anybody read that? There's all kinds of writings from the Native Americans. Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. What has come to you lately? What is your inspiration that you have received on your mountain, in your higher state of mind? That's the important part. Doesn't matter where it is on the earth plane. Now, metaphysically, a Moses state of mind is a state of mind that understands the law. And that state of mind can always be legalistic thinking. This is the law. Legally, this is what we do or don't do, and then we'll be all right, right? At the time of Moses, he was losing cohesiveness at this nation that he was traveling with. And he had to have rules of conduct to keep that cohesiveness going. But when Jesus came, it was time to free the burden of the law. There is only one law, and that is the law of love. My burden is light. Now, the other person you have to look at is Mel Brooks, who wrote The History of the World Part 1. And we know that there were really 3 tablets, and one of them broke as they came down the mountain. And don't you wonder what those other 5 laws would have been, whatever rules? I mean, there were certainly more important things they could have put into those 10 commandments, like don't torture people, don't abuse children. Why didn't they have that stuff in there? So I like to think those kind of things were on the other tablet that fell and broke when it came down the mountain. And my personal favorite is take everything with a grain of salt. That's my personal favorite. Or there's an exception to every rule. That's my other favorite. But anyway, the commandments, let's look at those, especially the first 2 today. They begin, I am Jehovah thy God, who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So if we look at those states of mind, metaphysically, they're talking about a state of mind here. And they're talking about a state of mind in bondage with all that literalness, all that legalistic thinking. And Jesus simply said, know the truth. The truth will set you free. It's as simple as that. I read this week about the traditional and literal interpretation of the 10 Commandments. This level of religious thinking, there's a difference between religious and spiritual. This level of religious thinking has 2 main purposes. Physical survival of its followers, and learning the difference between good and evil. Is that not what we had learned growing up? All of this taught under strict adherence to the letter of the law of cause and effect. If you do this, this will happen. That's the law of cause and effect. Everything I send out comes back to me. Every thought I have to live in the consequence of the thoughts, the words that go out. This was a necessary evolutionary phase for mankind on earth. But it should not be considered the end. Jesus came and demonstrated the next higher phase. And when he taught, he said, now you've heard people say, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, love, forgive, 7 times 70. He had a whole different interpretation of the law from a higher place. And he said, I've not come to abolish the law, I've come to fulfill it. He wasn't taking it away. He was saying, let's bring it on up to a higher place. So with that, let's look at the very first commandment. And it sounds like a piece of cake. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. Well, that's a piece of cake. I don't have a lot of gods hanging around, do you? I believe in the one presence, the one power. I don't worship other gods. Or do I? There's a deeper meaning. Anytime you consider something as supreme, divine, and the source of your good. Oops. The source of your good being something other than the divine. What do you see as the source of your good? What do you place your security in? Is it your checking account? Your investments? Property you might own? Inheritance? chocolate. That's for pleasure. That has not strictly pleasure. How about military strength? Don't we place a lot of our faith in our military strength and guns? You know, we lived in Tulsa for a while. They had a lot of gun shows there. I imagine they have them here too. I think everybody should have to go to a gun show at least once. You know, acres and acres of all these, you know, weapons of mass destruction. Anyway, we won't go there today. How about underground shelters and secret rooms in case there's a disaster? Do you put your faith in that? What about special relationships? You know, I like that saying of the little girl that the dad was explaining to her about God, that infinite being, invisible, and she said, I want a God with skin on. Don't we all want a God with skin on? Michael's my God with skin on. I always wanted a relationship that would be that presence for me, and he's been that for me. Most of you know we're going through something right now where he's got to go in for heart surgery. So we're having to look at my God with skin on. You know, what am I going to do? You know, if that's not there. So we have to watch what we put our faith in. Our faith has got to be in that one presence, that one power, no matter what we're going through. I want a God with skin on. So we go even deeper. What does that mean? Whatever we give power to, it would be so easy to give power to the fear right now. Fear and worry can become our God. That something out there has more power than something in here. That something the doctors say has more power than our faith in what is within. Or that other people's opinions may influence us. That we give that more power than truth of our being. That anything we're attached to, we're giving power to. Now how many here have broken the first commandment? Anybody squeaming a little bit? Anybody getting a little squirmish? In 1 John 4:4, we're reminded, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Greater is he that is in you than that which is in the world. If you're comfortable, would you repeat with me? There's a power in me that is so much greater than anything in this world. Together, there is a power in me that is so much greater than anything in the world. One more time. There is a power in me that is so much greater than anything in the world. So does that feel like a better version of that first commandment, having other gods? Well, let's look at the second one. Is almost the same. You shall not make for yourself a graven image. Well, I'm not a carver. I haven't carved any graven images lately. Anybody here been carving a graven image? Any fatted cows out there that you carved? No. Now, back in Moses' time, that was big business, selling statues and images. And that's, again, like that God with skin on. We all feel a little safer if we can look at a picture of Jesus, a picture of Buddha, maybe have a little statue. I grew up, we had statues and pictures, holy cards. There's something about holding on to something that makes you feel safer, but that's sort of a false sense of security, isn't it? That we can have something to remind us of the one presence, one power. But that's a false sense of security. So the other thing we've done, let's take it even deeper than that literal sense. We have carved God in our image rather than carving ourselves in God's image. We've given that man in the sky human behaviors. When it's not a man in the sky, it's not a human that punishes, judges, has anger and revenge, throws his children into burning eternal fire of hell. We've made God in the image of us human beings. I love Bishop Spong, who always says, if that were a human father, we'd arrest him for child abuse. We've made this image. So that graven image goes so much deeper. Every time we misperceive something, we're making a graven image. We judge something. We judge each other. We're making a graven image. We live on perception alone on this earth plane. Whatever we see, hear, touch, feel, we hold that as real. That's a graven image rather than the truth. There's a great story of how we do this. 3 friends I'd like to say it's a nun, a priest, and a rabbi, but it's a psychologist, a scientist, and a theologian. We're exploring the great Northwest together. As novices often do, the three friends became lost. And they happened upon a cabin in the woods, and they walked in, wanting to inquire of directions, but nobody was in there. There was nobody home. But they saw something unusual in this cabin. They found in the middle of the room there was a cast iron potbelly stove, which they were glad of. It was warm in there. But it was suspended from the ceiling by a wire 3 feet off the ground, this potbelly stove. And immediately, through their perceptions, each one of them, from their own point of view, started to analyze why this potbelly stove was hanging from the ceiling on wire. It's simple, said the psychologist. Whoever suspended this stove has discovered a great way to stimulate re-entry into the womb by crawling underneath it. Boulder Dash, said the scientist. The owner of this stove has discovered a principle of thermodynamics and is circulating heat more evenly in the room. That almost sounds good, but baloney, said the theologian. It's obviously a religious experience. Raising fire to God is an ancient tradition and a religious ritual. Well, at that time, they heard somebody stomping in. The grizzled trapper returned to find these three strangers in his cabin analyzing his potbelly stove. And after they all apologized for intruding on his home, they started to ask him what was the reason for this potbelly stove hanging from the ceiling. The trapper said, simple, plenty of wire, not much stovepipe. You see how our perceptions, we make up stories, we see things, we make these graven images out of everything that's happening in the world. And the evil is simply a parasite fed by our fears and misperceptions. One of my favorite movie is Pleasantville. Anybody seen Pleasantville? It's a black and white movie. And this stranger from another dimension comes to Pleasantville where everything is very pleasant. It's not a plane of duality. There's no duality. Everything is simply flatline. And he brings passion and energy, so you have highs and lows. And all of a sudden there's color and beauty, but there's also sadness. Well, at the end of the movie, the three of them are all sitting on a bench, the woman and two men. And they're sitting there realizing they don't know what's going to happen. Something good could happen. Something bad could happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. And they're having to be okay with that. When you know the one presence, one power, and you're sitting on that bench not knowing what's going to happen, you can release the fear, let go of the graven images of what could happen, and simply live in that trust of grace. I am one with God. I am one with the all-sufficiency of the divine. What is there to fear? Repeat once more with me. There is a power in me that is so much greater than anything in the world. Together, there is a power in me that is so much greater than anything in the world. Good old Emerson said it so beautifully about this whole legalistic thinking. He said, when we break, there's that word break again, when we break with our God of tradition and cease from the God of our intellect, God will fire the heart with his presence. We let go of all that legalistic thinking. As Jesus came, he said there is only one law, the Jewish Shema, one of my favorite prayers. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, and love your neighbor as yourself. Let's take that into prayer, shutting our eyes once more away from appearances, away from those graven false images that we make with our fears and our perceptions and our judgments. We let them go. They do not serve us. They are a burden. And we hold on to the yoke that Jesus has. The burden is light. In the presence of love, there is no fear. Perfect love casts out all fear. And perfect grace carries us through any situation, provides for us, guides and directs us. We live, move, and have our being in that presence of grace, and we are so blessed. We simply say, thank you, God. And so it is, so it truly is. Amen.